A wealthy black man goes undercover as a regular person to one of his real estate agencies. One of the racist salesmen does not recognize the black man and makes racist comments towards him. The next day, the salesman is shocked when the black man returns in an expensive suit and tells him who he really is. Jeremy Williams sat behind his wide oak desk, staring at the email open on his laptop screen. The office was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the air conditioner, but his mind buzzed with the weight of the words in front of him. He'd always prided himself on building a company based on fairness, hard work, and respect. His real estate empire had grown from the ground up, starting with small, affordable homes, and now spanning luxury properties across the East Coast. The email was brief, yet it packed a punch. It was an anonymous tip from a customer who claimed to have experienced racial discrimination at one of his company's branches. Not just any branch, one of his top-performing ones, located in an upscale part of New York City. According to the message, a white real estate agent had refused to show properties to people of color, making derogatory remarks and assuming they couldn't afford them. Jeremy clenched his jaw. He scrolled through the email again, reading the details about specific incidents. He'd heard whispers of this before, subtle complaints that had never been substantiated. But this was different. The language in the email, the frustration and the exhaustion, it struck a nerve. He stood up, hands resting on the back of his chair, and stared out the large window of his office. New York's skyline stretched out before him, a city where opportunity and prejudice often collided. The rumors had been building for months. He couldn't ignore them any longer. If there was truth to this, it wasn't just a problem. It was a direct threat to everything he stood for. Jeremy could have sent someone else to investigate, a regional manager maybe. But no, this was personal. If his business was harboring discrimination, it was his responsibility to root it out. He wasn't the type to sit behind a desk and let things spiral. Action was in his blood. His plan formed quickly. He'd go undercover, posing as a prospective buyer. No flashy suits, no obvious signs of wealth. He wanted to see how the agents, particularly the one named in the email, David Harper, treated someone who didn't look like their usual wealthy clients. His phone buzzed on the desk. Jeremy glanced at the screen. It was a message from his assistant, reminding him about an upcoming board meeting. He typed a quick reply, rescheduling it for later. There was something far more important to handle now. Before leaving, Jeremy checked his reflection in the window. He'd learned long ago how to present himself in different spaces. For this visit, he'd strip away the markers of his success. He swapped his usual tailored suit for a simple black hoodie and jeans, items that wouldn't attract too much attention, but wouldn't scream wealth either. As he headed out, he called his driver and asked to be dropped off a block away from the branch office. This wasn't about making a scene. It was about seeing the truth firsthand, without bias. Stepping onto the bustling New York street, Jeremy felt a sense of purpose. He knew the risks. He could have easily sent in someone else to deal with this problem. But as always, Jeremy believed in leading from the front. This wasn't just about protecting his company's image. It was about protecting the people who walked through its doors. As the office building came into view, sleek and modern with its glass facade, Jeremy's heartbeat quickened. He wasn't just a businessman today. He was a man on a mission to ensure that, in his company, respect was not just a word, it was a principle to be lived. He took a deep breath, straightened his hoodie, and walked through the doors. The first step in uncovering the truth had begun. The glass doors of the real estate office slid open with a soft hiss as Jeremy stepped inside. The place was pristine, exactly what he expected from a branch that handled some of the most exclusive properties in the city. The floor was polished to a mirror-like shine. Sleek modern furniture lined the waiting area, and abstract art adorned the walls, giving off an air of wealth and exclusivity. He scanned the room. Behind the reception desk, a young woman, likely in her early 30s, looked up with a practiced smile. Her nameplate read, Lydia Evans. She was dressed in a well-tailored navy blazer, her dark hair neatly pulled into a bun, professional, polite. She seemed welcoming enough, and for a moment, Jeremy wondered if maybe the rumors were wrong. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" Lydia's voice was warm but measured. She'd likely said the same words hundreds of times, carefully balancing professionalism with approachability. Jeremy smiled back, keeping his expression neutral. "I'm interested in looking at some properties in the area." Lydia's smile widened slightly, but before she could say more, a man approached from one of the glass-walled offices. Jeremy recognized him immediately from the description in the email. David Harper, tall, mid-40s, with a sharp, tailored suit that spoke of success and status. His light brown hair was slicked back, and his eyes were quick to size up Jeremy in a single glance. Whatever David saw in that glance, it wasn't good. Without acknowledging Lydia, David slid into the conversation as if Jeremy was wasting the woman's time. Do you have an appointment? David's voice was cool, businesslike, but the edge of dismissiveness was unmistakable. No, I don't, Jeremy replied, keeping his tone even. I wanted to see what properties were available. David didn't hide the fact that he was assessing Jeremy, from his plain hoodie to his casual sneakers. The silence stretched a beat too long, and then David's mouth curved into a polite but thin smile. We specialize in luxury properties here, very high-end. You might want to try another agency if you're looking for something more affordable. Lydia shifted uncomfortably behind the desk, her smile faltering. Jeremy noticed it, but he kept his focus on David, who clearly wanted to wrap this up quickly. This wasn't going to be a welcoming experience, and David didn't bother hiding that. I'm aware of that, Jeremy said. That's why I'm here. David's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if calculating how much further he should push. He exhaled, visibly irritated that Jeremy wasn't taking the hint. Well, if you insist, David said, I suppose I can show you a few listings. But between us, I don't think this will be a good fit for you. These properties are significant investments. The message was clear. You don't belong here. Jeremy felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. He'd expected this, but the outright dismissal still stung. In his world, people like David had always assumed that a man like him couldn't afford the finer things. It was exhausting, but today wasn't about his feelings. It was about exposing the problem. I'll let you decide what fits, Jeremy replied, the edge in his voice barely noticeable. David sighed, then glanced at Lydia. Why don't you pull up the listings for the penthouses at the Chelsea on 5th? He didn't wait for her to answer before turning his back and gesturing for Jeremy to follow. Lydia gave Jeremy an apologetic glance, but Jeremy just nodded. She wasn't the problem here. As Jeremy followed David through the office, he noted the coldness of the place. There was no warmth, no sense that people mattered. The walls of the office were just as glossy and indifferent as David. It was all about appearances. They reached a small meeting room with a glass table at the center. David pulled out his tablet and swiped through a few listings, barely looking at Jeremy. So these are in the 8 to 10 million range, David said, his tone flat, as if he didn't expect Jeremy to even bother asking. Very exclusive. You'd need pre-approval from a bank before even considering an offer on one of these. Why don't you show me the details? Jeremy said, keeping his tone casual. David hesitated, then turned the tablet toward him. I just don't want to waste your time. Jeremy glanced at the screen, where pictures of sleek, multi-million-dollar penthouses filled the display. He already knew the properties. He owned half of them after all. But he wanted to see how far David would take this. I've got time, Jeremy said, his eyes meeting David's. David smirked, though it was more of a grimace, and started running through the properties without enthusiasm. This one's got a private rooftop terrace, modern finishes, 2 floors. It's listed at 8.5 million. Jeremy nodded. Looks nice. David didn't even try to hide his impatience. Look, this is a waste of time. We both know people like you can't afford a property like this. The words hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Jeremy's pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. There it was, the blatant assumption, wrapped in a thin veneer of professionalism. People like me? Jeremy asked, his voice even. David shrugged, as if it were obvious. No offense, but these properties are for serious buyers. High-income professionals, executives. We have to be realistic. Jeremy studied him for a moment, weighing his options. He could blow this whole thing up right here, reveal who he was, and watch David squirm. But that wouldn't solve the deeper problem. Jeremy wasn't just here to humiliate one man. He was here to fix the culture that allowed this kind of discrimination to thrive. Without another word, Jeremy pushed the tablet back across the table. You're right. Let's not waste any more time. David blinked, confused by Jeremy's sudden compliance. Okay. The walk back to the lobby was quiet, the click of Jeremy's footsteps the only sound between him and David. Jeremy could feel the tension hanging in the air, but David's arrogance was palpable. To him, this was just another easy dismissal. Someone who didn't fit his idea of a high-end buyer didn't deserve his time. As they reached the front desk, David slowed down, already showing signs of wanting to end this interaction. Lydia looked up from her computer, her eyes shifting between Jeremy and David. Her hands hovered over the keyboard as though she wanted to offer help, but didn't quite know how. Well, David began, already slipping into a tone that suggested finality. If you're looking for something more reasonable, I'm sure there are other agencies nearby that might be better suited for your needs. Jeremy didn't flinch, but inside, his frustration deepened. Reasonable. He had heard that word enough times in his life to know exactly what David meant. This wasn't about the price range. It was about his assumption that Jeremy couldn't possibly be a serious buyer. I never said I was looking for something more reasonable, Jeremy said, his tone steady. He wasn't going to give David the satisfaction of an easy out. David sighed, clearly irritated now, but trying to keep some semblance of professionalism. Look, I've been doing this a long time. I can usually tell within a few minutes who's serious and who's just browsing. Jeremy tilted his head slightly. And what makes you think I'm just browsing? David blinked, his smile faltering. He hadn't expected Jeremy to push back. I'm just being honest here. These properties require significant financial backing, and unless you've got pre-approval from a bank, I don't need a loan, Jeremy interrupted, keeping his tone neutral. He was done with David's subtle jabs and thinly veiled racism. David raised his eyebrows as if Jeremy's statement was something he couldn't quite believe. Well, these aren't exactly starter homes, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Lydia shifted uncomfortably behind the desk, her eyes darting between the two men. She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling with whether to intervene. Jeremy caught her gaze for a moment, but she quickly looked away, her hands fidgeting with a stack of papers. She wasn't part of this problem, but her silence weighed heavily in the room. Jeremy leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking on David. You know, it's interesting, he said calmly. You've spent the entire time telling me what I can't afford, but you never asked me what I wanted. David blinked again, his confident facade slipping just for a second before he regained his composure. Like I said, he replied, more curtly now, I can tell. I'm just saving us both some time. Jeremy stood straight, taking a deep breath. Every part of him wanted to drop the act, to tell David who he really was, to watch the man backpedal in a panic. But that would be too easy, too predictable. Jeremy had bigger plans. Funny how people like you are so good at telling what others can or can't afford, Jeremy said, his tone edged with a calm frustration. Yet you know so little. David's eyes narrowed, his annoyance finally breaking through his polished exterior. People like me? Yes, Jeremy replied smoothly. People who make snap judgments based on a hoodie instead of a suit. People who think money looks one way when it doesn't. Lydia shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Jeremy noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, but David seemed oblivious. David's face tightened, and he crossed his arms, clearly ready to end this conversation. Look, I don't want to get into an argument here. I'm just being realistic. These properties are for serious buyers, executives, high net worth individuals, people with real financial power. And how do you know I'm not one of those people? Jeremy asked, keeping his voice level but letting the weight of the question hang in the air. David chuckled, though it lacked any real humor. Come on, we both know people like you don't just walk in off the street and buy properties like this. That's not how it works. The words landed hard, but Jeremy didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, though, his frustration was boiling. This was exactly what he had feared. An ingrained bias, subtle but undeniable. David didn't see Jeremy for who he was, only for what he assumed Jeremy should be. Jeremy stood there, silent for a moment, letting the tension build. He could feel David's impatience growing, his desire to get rid of him, to move on to a client who looked the part. I see, Jeremy finally said, his voice calm. Well, I won't waste any more of your time. David relaxed visibly, satisfied that he had managed to avoid a more heated exchange. Yeah, that's probably for the best, he said, already turning away. Good luck finding something more in your range. Jeremy gave a nod, then turned to Lydia. Her eyes were downcast, her fingers still nervously playing with the papers on her desk. She glanced up briefly, catching his gaze, and in that moment, Jeremy saw the discomfort in her expression. She knew, she saw what was happening, but she stayed silent, just as she had before. Thank you, Jeremy said to her, his tone softer, but his message clear. He wasn't just thanking her for the interaction. He was acknowledging that she had seen the truth, even if she hadn't spoken it. Lydia nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. You're welcome, she whispered, almost too quietly to be heard. With that, Jeremy walked toward the glass doors, feeling the weight of David's ignorance behind him. He had what he needed, he had seen enough, but this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the door slid open and Jeremy stepped back onto the busy New York street, the cool air hit his face, bringing with it a sense of clarity. David Harper had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow, Jeremy would be back, but this time, things would be different. The next morning, Jeremy stood at the foot of the gleaming office building. The same facade of glass and steel reflected the early sunlight, as indifferent as the man waiting inside. Jeremy had dressed similarly to yesterday. Simple jeans, a casual shirt, nothing flashy. The only thing different today was his attitude. He wasn't here to be dismissed. He was here to get results. Inside, Lydia was at her desk again, tapping away at her keyboard. She looked up when he entered, recognition flickering across her face. There was hesitation in her smile, as though she wasn't sure how to greet him. She nodded, but quickly returned to her work, her eyes avoiding his. David Harper was already there, leaning against the reception counter, chatting with another agent. He glanced over at Jeremy and paused. It was subtle, but Jeremy caught it, a flicker of surprise that Jeremy had come back. David's eyes narrowed just slightly. Then he plastered on that same thin smile from the day before. "Back again, huh?" David said, pushing off the counter and walking toward Jeremy, his hands sliding into the pockets of his tailored trousers. "Still looking?" Jeremy met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I want to see the property you mentioned yesterday." David blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the directness. He recovered quickly, though. "Ah, the penthouse. Sure, we can do that. I just hope you understand what you're getting into." Jeremy gave a small smile but didn't respond. He had heard enough yesterday to know exactly what David thought of him. No need to keep going in circles. "Follow me then," David said, his tone all business now. "It's only a short walk." Jeremy followed David out of the office, the cool morning air hitting them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. The streets were alive with people going about their day, oblivious to the tension simmering between the two men walking side by side. As they reached the building that housed the penthouse, David pulled out a keycard, swiping it at the entrance to let them in. The lobby was expansive, with marble floors and high ceilings, designed to impress anyone who stepped inside. Jeremy had been in plenty of lobbies like this before. He owned a few just like it, but today, he was just another prospective buyer, at least in David's eyes. "These units are top of the line," David said as they entered the elevator. His tone was practiced, professional, but there was an undercurrent of arrogance that was hard to miss. "The kind of place where you get what you pay for, you know?" Jeremy leaned against the wall of the elevator, watching David closely. "What exactly does that mean?" he asked, his tone calm but pointed. David glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "I mean, it's not just about the property. It's about the people who live here. You're paying for exclusivity, privacy. You won't have to worry about, well, the wrong kind of neighbors." Jeremy raised an eyebrow. There it was, hidden in plain sight. The subtle implication that some people didn't belong here, that wealth came with an unspoken barrier. One David assumed Jeremy couldn't cross. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal the penthouse floor. David stepped out first, gesturing for Jeremy to follow. "You'll see what I mean." They walked down a short hallway before reaching the door to the penthouse. David unlocked it and swung the door open, stepping aside to let Jeremy in first. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire living room, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The open concept design made the space feel even larger, with sleek, modern finishes and high-end furnishings staged perfectly to impress any buyer. Jeremy wandered through the space, taking it in. It was an impressive property, no question about that. But what mattered today wasn't the view or the layout. It was the man standing behind him, still evaluating whether Jeremy was serious or just another waste of time. "This one's listed at $8.5 million, David said, walking over to the windows. "Fully furnished, of course. All the amenities you could want. Private elevator access, rooftop terrace, state-of-the-art kitchen. You won't find anything better in this part of the city." Jeremy nodded, keeping his face neutral. He knew the property well. He had helped finance the development years ago. But that wasn't information David needed to know just yet. "And the neighbors?" Jeremy asked, keeping his tone casual. "I'm assuming they're the right kind of people." David turned to face him, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that said everything without needing to spell it out. "Let's just say you'd fit right in, if you've got the means to stay." Jeremy's patience was wearing thin. He had come here to give David one last chance to reveal himself fully, and he had. The man wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Every word dripped with condescension, every glance an assumption. "And you think I don't have the means?" Jeremy said, his voice sharp but controlled. David hesitated, the smile fading for a brief second before he regained his composure. "Look, I'm just being honest. You know how this works. These properties, this lifestyle, it's not for everyone." Jeremy walked over to the windows, staring out at the city. He could feel his frustration bubbling up, but he kept it in check. This wasn't the time to blow up. Not yet. "And what makes you so sure it's not for me?" David laughed softly as if the question was absurd. "Come on. I've been in this business long enough to know. It's nothing personal. It's just the reality of it." "Reality," Jeremy repeated, his tone thoughtful. He turned to face David, his gaze hard. "The reality is, you don't know a thing about me. You took one look at me and made a decision." David's smile wavered, and for the first time, Jeremy saw uncertainty in his eyes. "I'm just trying to be realistic about what you can afford," David said. But the confidence in his voice was gone, replaced by defensiveness. "And what exactly do you think I can afford, David?" Jeremy pressed, stepping closer. Because it sounds to me like you think people who look like me don't belong in places like this. David stiffened, his eyes narrowing. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Jeremy's voice was low, but the power behind it was undeniable. For a moment, there was silence. David shifted on his feet, clearly uncomfortable now, but unwilling to back down. Jeremy held his gaze, letting the weight of his words sink in. Finally, David spoke, his voice tight. Look, I don't know what you're trying to imply, but I'm just doing my job. I show properties to serious buyers. If that's not you, then Jeremy cut him off. You'll know soon enough whether I'm a serious buyer. David looked confused for a split second, then quickly masked it with his usual arrogance. Well, like I said, if you have the means, we can talk. Otherwise, I think we're done here. Jeremy stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, David. We are done here. Without another word, Jeremy turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing through the empty penthouse. David stood frozen, watching him leave, still oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed. Tomorrow, things would be different. Tomorrow, David would see who Jeremy Williams really was. But for now, Jeremy let him think he'd won. Back at the office, Lydia sat at her desk and watched as David strutted back into the office, his usual swagger on full display. He made a beeline for Lydia's desk, still wearing that self-satisfied smirk she had seen so many times before. It made her uneasy. Lydia forced herself to keep typing, though she knew she wouldn't be able to avoid the conversation. David leaned against the counter, crossing his arms casually. Well, that's that, he said with a chuckle, as though the entire encounter had been a joke. I knew from the moment he walked in yesterday he wasn't serious. Lydia glanced up from her screen, biting her lip. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. You don't think he was serious? She asked, keeping her tone even, though inside she was bracing herself for what David would say next. David rolled his eyes, clearly thinking this was a waste of time. Come on, Lydia. You saw him, dressed like that, walking in here asking to see properties like that penthouse? People like him don't just stroll in off the street and buy places like that. Lydia's fingers froze on the keyboard. She had heard David talk like this before, dismissing clients based on how they looked or acted, but something about today felt different. She could still see Jeremy's face, calm but firm, as he stood his ground against David's quiet arrogance. It didn't sit right with her, the way David was talking about him now. You don't know what kind of money he has, Lydia said softly, trying to keep her tone neutral. People don't always show their wealth the way you expect. David snorted, shaking his head. Please, Lydia. I've been doing this for years. I know how to read people. And that guy? He was just another wannabe, hoping to get a taste of the high life. Lydia clenched her fists under the desk, willing herself to stay calm. She wanted to say more, to challenge him, but she knew how these conversations went. David had a way of brushing aside anything that didn't fit his view of the world. You can't always tell, Lydia insisted, her voice quieter now. He didn't seem like he was just wasting time. Maybe you misjudged him. David looked at her like she had said something ridiculous. Lydia, come on. I don't have time to babysit every guy who walks in here thinking he can afford something he obviously can't. I know what serious buyers look like, and that wasn't it. Lydia's patience was wearing thin. She felt like she was banging her head against a wall, trying to reason with someone who refused to see beyond his narrow view of the world. She had worked hard to get to where she was in this office, and she had seen enough to know that David's attitude was a problem, but confronting him was never easy. He didn't listen. He didn't care. You're making assumptions, Lydia said quietly, her voice tighter now, and that's dangerous. David shrugged, clearly done with the conversation. Whatever, it doesn't matter. The guy's not coming back, and we've got more important clients to focus on. He pushed off the counter and started walking toward his office, already forgetting the conversation. Let me know when the next real buyer comes in. Lydia watched him walk away, frustration boiling inside her. She had tried to reason with him, but it was like talking to a wall. David didn't see people like Jeremy as potential clients. He saw them as inconveniences, as obstacles to the real money he thought he deserved. She sighed, her fingers resting on the keyboard again. She wanted to do more, to say more, but what could she do? David was powerful in the office, and Lydia had already seen how he dealt with anyone who challenged him. Still, something told her that this wasn't over. She glanced at the clock on her screen, feeling the weight of her silence pressing down on her. Jeremy had left the office, but his presence still lingered in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. The next morning, Jeremy sat at his desk. The city skyline stretched out before him. The events of the previous day replayed in his mind. David's arrogance, his blind confidence, and the insult that had cut through all pretense. Jeremy knew what had to happen next, and he had planned every detail carefully. Today was about more than just setting things right. It was about making a statement, not only to David Harper, but to everyone in the office who had stood by silently. Jeremy had no tolerance for discrimination in his company, and that would be made crystal clear. He glanced at his watch. It was time. Jeremy stood, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, a stark contrast to the casual clothes he had worn the previous days. Today, he wasn't just another prospective buyer. Today, he was the owner. As he stepped out of his office and into the waiting car, his mind was clear. He wasn't angry. There was no need for anger now. What he felt was resolve. David Harper had crossed a line, and Jeremy was about to show him the consequences of underestimating someone based on nothing but appearances. The car pulled up in front of the real estate branch, and Jeremy took a moment to appreciate the irony of the situation. Yesterday, he had walked into this same building, dismissed and belittled. Today, he was walking in as the man who controlled the fate of everyone inside. He stepped out of the car, the sharp click of his shoes on the pavement echoing in the quiet morning air. As he entered the office, the glass doors sliding open with a soft hiss, heads turned. The polished marble floors and sleek modern decor seemed less impressive now, a reminder of the cold professionalism that had allowed someone like David to thrive unchecked. Lydia was at her desk, typing away, but the moment she saw Jeremy, her eyes widened slightly. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, unsure of what to do. This time, she didn't need to wonder if she should greet him. There was something different about him, something commanding. She could feel it. "Good morning, Lydia," Jeremy said, his voice calm and professional. "Good morning, Mr. Williams," she replied, her voice tinged with nerves. She knew something was happening, something bigger than the usual office routine. "Is David in?" Jeremy asked, his tone smooth but firm. Lydia nodded, casting a quick glance toward David's office. "Yes, he's in. Do you want me to?" "I'll take care of it," Jeremy said, cutting her off gently but firmly. Without waiting for a response, he walked toward David's office. Lydia's eyes followed him, her hand frozen on the mouse. She had a sinking feeling in her chest, a sense that this was about to be a reckoning, but she didn't know for whom. Jeremy knocked once, firmly, and without waiting for a reply, pushed open the door. David sat at his desk, his head buried in some paperwork, unaware of who had just walked in. "David," Jeremy said, his voice steady. David looked up, his brow furrowing for a moment as if trying to place Jeremy. Then recognition dawned on his face. But this time, it wasn't the same casual dismissal from the day before. This was something different. "Mr. Williams?" David said, standing awkwardly from behind his desk, his confusion evident. "What are you doing here?" Jeremy took his time, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him. He glanced around, taking in the neatly organized desk, the framed certificates on the wall, symbols of David's success. Symbols that meant nothing now. "You seemed surprised," Jeremy said, raising an eyebrow. David's face twitched, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "Well, I didn't expect you to. I didn't know you were—" He trailed off, his words fumbling in the air, unsure of how to finish. "You didn't expect me to be your boss," Jeremy said flatly, filling in the blanks for him. David froze, the reality sinking in. His eyes widened slightly, his usual confident demeanor crumbling at the edges. "Wait, you're the owner?" "Yes, David," Jeremy said, his tone cold and measured. "I own this company, and I've been watching you closely. Yesterday, you had a chance to treat me like any other client who walks through that door. Instead, you chose to assume." David's face paled. "Mr. Williams, I didn't mean—" Jeremy held up a hand, silencing him. "You don't need to explain. Your actions spoke for themselves." David swallowed hard, the air in the room thick with tension. He glanced at the door as if considering an escape, but there was nowhere to run. Jeremy's presence filled the room, and there was no mistaking who was in control now. "You see, David," Jeremy continued, his voice still calm, but with an edge that cut through the silence. "I built this company on the idea that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. You've shown me that you don't share that vision." David's hands shook slightly, his palms pressing against the desk as he leaned forward. "Mr. Williams, please, I didn't realize—" "No, you didn't realize," Jeremy interrupted, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You didn't realize because you never stopped to ask. You never stopped to think that someone like me could be your client, your equal, or your boss." David's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was trapped in the web he had spun with his own arrogance, and now he had no way out. "This company doesn't need people like you, David," Jeremy said, his tone final. "As of today, your employment is terminated." David's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, what? You're firing me?" "Yes," Jeremy said, his voice firm. Your behavior goes against everything this company stands for, and I can't have someone representing me who treats others the way you treated me. David stammered, trying to find something, anything, to say that could salvage the situation, but the words wouldn't come. He knew he had lost. He had made his assumptions, and now he was paying for them. Jeremy turned to leave, but before he opened the door, he paused, glancing back at David one last time. Let this be a lesson, David. You never know who's walking through that door. It's a shame you had to learn it this way. With that, Jeremy walked out, leaving David standing behind his desk, shell-shocked and speechless. As Jeremy stepped back into the office, Lydia looked up from her desk, her eyes wide with understanding. She didn't need to ask what had just happened. She could see it in the way Jeremy carried himself, the way David's door remained closed behind him. Jeremy nodded to her as he passed. I'll be addressing the staff soon. Lydia gave a small, grateful nod. She had stayed quiet for too long. But now, watching Jeremy take action, she knew change was coming. Jeremy walked out of the office, the same glass doors sliding open for him, but this time, he left with a sense of satisfaction. David Harper had underestimated him, but now the message was clear. Respect wasn't optional, and assumptions came with consequences. Jeremy had spent the day ensuring that every detail of the staff meeting was in place. After the conversation with David, there was no turning back. He wanted this to be more than just a dismissal. It needed to be a defining moment for the company. Everyone had to understand what happened, why it happened, and what would not be tolerated moving forward. He wasn't just here to remove one bad actor. He was here to set a new standard. By the time Jeremy arrived at the office in the late afternoon, the mood had shifted. Word had spread quickly. David's sudden absence was the talk of the day. The staff didn't know the full story yet, but they knew something big was coming. Lydia was at her desk, her posture tense, her eyes darting toward the back office where Jeremy had spoken to David earlier. She had seen David leave in a rush, face pale and tight, offering no explanation as he walked past her. Now, she watched Jeremy enter the office, his face calm but serious, and she knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. Jeremy walked past her with a nod. Gather the team in the conference room, Lydia. I need to address everyone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she sent out the group message. Knowing this was no ordinary meeting, she had been around long enough to know that what was about to happen would change things, either for the better or worse. Lydia stood up from her desk and followed Jeremy into the sleek glass-walled conference room where the rest of the staff would soon gather. Within minutes, the team filed in, whispering among themselves. They all glanced at Jeremy, seated at the head of the long modern table, his expression unreadable. Lydia sat at the far end, keeping her head down, but she could feel the tension thickening in the air. Everyone was waiting. Once the last person took their seat, Jeremy stood, and the room fell silent. His presence commanded attention without the need for raised voices or grand gestures. His calm demeanor carried weight, and everyone instinctively knew that whatever came next was important. Thank you all for coming, Jeremy began, his voice steady. I've called this meeting today to address an issue that has been brought to my attention, a serious issue that affects not just this office, but the core values of this company. The room was silent, eyes locked on him, waiting. As you know, I've been involved in the real estate business for many years, Jeremy continued. I've built this company on principles of respect, fairness, and integrity. But over the past few weeks, I've received troubling reports about how some of our clients are being treated, specifically clients of color. There were subtle shifts in the room. People exchanged glances, though no one spoke. The tension was palpable. Jeremy let the silence linger for a moment before continuing. Yesterday, I came into this office undercover, posing as a prospective buyer. I didn't announce who I was because I wanted to see firsthand how our clients are treated when they don't come in looking like they fit a certain mold. Lydia's heart pounded. She knew exactly where this was going. She had seen the way David treated Jeremy, the way he dismissed him from the moment he walked in. Her stomach twisted in knots as she realized that Jeremy had been watching everything. I was met with condescension, Jeremy said, his voice still calm but firm. I was judged based on my appearance, based on the assumption that I couldn't afford the property I was inquiring about. I was spoken down to and dismissed without anyone bothering to learn who I was or what I could bring to the table. The room was now completely still. Some of the staff shifted uncomfortably in their seats, understanding the gravity of what Jeremy was saying. No one dared to interrupt. I'm not here to name names or embarrass anyone publicly, Jeremy continued. But I will say this. The person responsible for that behavior is no longer with this company. A few gasps echoed through the room, and Jeremy let the revelation sink in. Everyone knew who he was talking about. David Harper, the office's top agent. Gone. Just like that. Lydia sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She knew David had crossed the line, but hearing Jeremy speak so plainly about what had happened made it all too real. She felt a mix of emotions, relief that David was gone, but guilt for not speaking up sooner, for not doing more when she had the chance. Jeremy continued, his tone steady but purposeful. What happened yesterday wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger problem that has no place in this company. We serve people from all walks of life. Everyone who walks through that door deserves to be treated with the same respect, regardless of how they look, how they dress, or where they come from. His eyes scanned the room, making sure everyone understood the weight of his words. If anyone in this room believes otherwise, if anyone thinks they can continue treating clients differently based on their assumptions about who's serious and who's not, you should find another place to work. The room remained deathly quiet, the gravity of Jeremy's message sinking in. No one dared to look away. His words weren't just a warning, they were a statement of fact. The old way of doing things was over. Jeremy took a deep breath, his voice softening slightly. I want this company to stand for something. I want us to be a place where people feel welcome, where they know they'll be treated fairly, no matter who they are. That's the only way we're going to succeed, and it's the only way I'm going to let us move forward. He paused, giving the room time to absorb everything. Then, he added, we're going to be holding a series of workshops and training sessions, starting next week, to make sure everyone here understands the expectations moving forward. I expect full participation, and I expect change. With that, Jeremy stepped back, letting his words hang in the air. He had said what needed to be said, and the room was left to grapple with the reality of the new direction. Lydia exhaled, her heart finally starting to slow. She felt a wave of relief wash over her. Jeremy had done what she had been too afraid to do. He had confronted the problem head-on, and he had set a new standard for the office. Jeremy glanced around the room one last time, his gaze steady, but not unkind. If anyone has questions or concerns, you're welcome to come to me directly. My door is always open. Thank you. The meeting was over, but the impact of Jeremy's words would linger long after. As he left the conference room, the weight of the old ways lifted, making room for something better. Lydia watched him leave, and for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful about the future of the company. The office buzzed with an undercurrent of unease after the meeting. Staff members gathered in small groups, whispering to one another about what had just happened. The name on everyone's lips was David Harper. The man who had been untouchable for so long was now gone, just like that. Jeremy's announcement had sent shockwaves through the office, and no one was quite sure what to expect next. Lydia sat at her desk, her fingers resting on the keyboard but not typing. She was still processing everything. The meeting had been short, but it carried so much weight. Jeremy had done what needed to be done, and yet part of her still felt unsettled. She hadn't spoken up when she should have. She had watched David mistreat Jeremy, knowing it was wrong, but had stayed silent out of fear, out of habit. Now, with David gone, she wondered if she could have made a difference earlier. The door to Jeremy's temporary office was open, and Lydia could see him sitting at his desk, reviewing paperwork. His calm demeanor hadn't shifted, even after dropping the bombshell in the meeting. She admired his ability to stay composed, but more than that, she admired his integrity. He had handled the situation with grace and firmness, and the consequences were now clear for everyone to see. As Lydia sat there, lost in thought, the phone rang. She answered it automatically, her voice still slightly shaky from the morning's events. It was Jenna Price, the regional manager, calling to check in. Jenna had been out of the office during the meeting, but word had clearly traveled fast. Lydia, I heard about what happened with David. Jenna's voice came through, sounding cautious. Can you give me a quick update? Lydia swallowed, unsure how much to say. Yes, David's no longer with the company. Mr. Williams addressed the team earlier today. He made it clear that changes are coming. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I see, Jenna said slowly. I'll be in later to go over the details. This isn't something we want to take lightly. Lydia nodded, even though Jenna couldn't see her. Of course. After hanging up, Lydia leaned back in her chair, her thoughts drifting back to Jeremy. She couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to talk to him, not just as his employee, but as someone who had witnessed everything. She stood up, smoothing down her blazer as she walked toward Jeremy's office. Her heart raced slightly, but she knew it was time to clear the air. She knocked gently on the doorframe, and Jeremy looked up from his papers, offering a small nod. Lydia, come in. She stepped inside, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Mr. Williams, I wanted to talk to you about, well, everything that's happened. Jeremy leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but attentive. Go ahead. Lydia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I know that what David did was wrong. I saw it happening, and I didn't speak up. I didn't know what to say. And now, with him gone, I can't help but feel like I should have done more. Jeremy didn't respond immediately. He studied her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. Then, he spoke, his voice measured. I appreciate your honesty, Lydia, and I understand why you didn't speak up. David had a lot of influence here, and it's not easy to challenge someone in that position. Lydia nodded, feeling a small weight lift off her shoulders. But I still feel like I should have said something. I knew what he was doing wasn't right, but I was afraid of the consequences. Jeremy sighed softly, leaning forward on his desk. Fear of consequences can be paralyzing, especially in environments where certain behaviors are allowed to continue unchecked. But the fact that you recognize it now is important. It means you're willing to learn and grow from this. Lydia's shoulders relaxed slightly. She had been dreading this conversation, but Jeremy's understanding made it easier to bear. I don't want this office to be a place where people are afraid to speak up, Jeremy continued. That's why I'm making these changes. It's not just about David, it's about shifting the culture here. I want everyone to feel empowered to call out injustice, no matter where it's coming from. Lydia nodded, her chest tightening with a mix of relief and guilt. She had always been someone who wanted to do the right thing, but she had let her fear of confrontation hold her back. Jeremy's words hit home. This wasn't just about the past. This was about what she could do going forward. I understand, she said softly, and I want to do better. I want to be part of the solution. Jeremy smiled, a small but genuine expression. That's all I ask, Lydia. We're all learning, and we all have to hold ourselves accountable. If you're willing to be part of the change, then that's what matters. Lydia exhaled, feeling lighter. Thank you. I won't let this happen again. Jeremy nodded, his expression kind, but firm. I trust you won't. She stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the conversation settle in. She wasn't perfect. None of them were. But at least now, she knew where she stood, and she knew what she needed to do going forward. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? Jeremy asked, breaking the silence. Lydia shook her head. No, that's all. I wanted to thank you for how you handled everything. It couldn't have been easy. Jeremy smiled again, the corners of his eyes crinkling slightly. No, it wasn't, but it was necessary. Lydia gave a small nod before turning to leave. As she walked back to her desk, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. The fear that had held her back before was still there, but it was no longer in control. She had Jeremy's trust, and that was something she didn't take lightly. Meanwhile, in the office, the consequences of the day's events were still unfolding. The staff moved with more caution, conversations were hushed, and there was a sense of anticipation hanging in the air. They all knew that Jeremy's leadership had set a new tone, and they were adjusting to the reality of what that meant. As the day came to a close, Lydia found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. David's departure had left a void, but it was a necessary one. Jeremy had shown them all what real leadership looked like: fair, just, and unwavering in its commitment to doing the right thing. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more changes, but for the first time, Lydia felt ready to face them, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new chapter for the company.